Good afternoon and welcome to Conversations with the Candidate on Oklahoman.com. I'm Chris Casteel and we are live here in the Oklahoman studio in downtown Oklahoma City, and we have today Congresswoman Kendra Horn of Oklahoma City, a Democrat who's running for re-election in the 5th District. On Tuesday, October 13th at 2 o'clock, we will have Republican State Senator Stephanie Bice, who is Congresswoman Horn's opponent in the race. And also next week, we will have U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe and his Democratic opponent, Abby Broyles. Hope you will join us for all those, either when they're streaming live, or you can find them later on our website, Oklahoman.com, or on our YouTube channel. And I should announce before we get started talking, the longtime video director for the Oklahoman, a great journalist, great guy, Dave Morris, took another job within Gannett and is now in Chicago. So no, Dave, you knew Dave well. But he left the department in the able hands of Paige Dillard, who got us set up today.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm glad to be here. It's nice to be able to sit down and actually talk face to face.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
So last night, first debate, how do you think it went? Yeah. It was pretty civil affair, no interruptions.
Yeah, I think it went pretty well. I mean, I think we discussed a lot of issues that are important to Oklahomans, and I appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation that isn't just about talking over each other. Right. To me, that doesn't help us, I don't know, have more clarity around what issues are out there. It's just a contest. So I appreciated the ability to have a good conversation about a lot of issues that are important to Oklahomans.
And just the first of three. You guys are doing two more. I think the second one's on October 13th. So.
Yes, yeah, next week, News 9, Channel 9, and then I think the week after is Fox 25. Right. So we'll have three.
So I wanted to just start off by letting you talk a little bit about your background. I know just a couple things. Chickasha, I do know. Yep. You were born and raised, I guess, in Chickasha, home of the Fighting Chicks.
Home of the Fighting Chicks.
And born in 1976 in Nation Centennial.
Exactly.
So just tell me a little. Chickasha is just down the turnpike, about 45, 50 miles.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about growing up in Chickasha.
Well, you know, my parents still live in the same house that I grew up in. You know, I've lived in the same place all growing up, and I think, you know, being from Chickasha, I had the good fortune to have grandparents and great-grandparents around, and I'm a fifth-generation Oklahoman on both sides of my family. Not everybody from Chickasha, but quite a few, and I think it provided me just this great foundation. I had, you know, my great-grandmother, on my mom's side was really close to her, as well as my other grandparents, and, you know, that it's a good
big
foundation. Yeah, big Thanksgivings, because my grandma was one of 5 girls that's still on my mom's side. So we had big family gatherings, but also, you know, on my dad's side, we go down to, his mom grew up in Mangum. Okay. And so we'd go down there and, you know, spend time together. But, you know, when I think about what kind of guides me and you know, the examples that come to me is really a lot of my grandparents and parents. They were small business owners. So my mom's a physical therapist, had a small physical therapy clinic. But when I was younger, my dad had a grocery store that was kind of family. You know, my great-grandfather and then my granddad and my dad.
What was the name of the store?
Clayton's Grocery. Okay. And then Clayton's number 2 was the one that my dad had.
Okay.
But, you know, like when I think about what drives me and what example that I try to follow in everything, that really is one of the things that comes back to me, because it was a really drilled in that, you know, we treat our friends and neighbors with respect, and, you know, that's the golden rule. And I remember arguing with my mom about that. Yeah, but if they're being mean to me, you know, why can't I? And learning that that's how we show up for each other. My great grandma, I called her Mama, is near and dear to my heart. I'm very fortunate she was around until I was in high school, and, you know, she raised 5 girls on her own during the middle of a depression, you know, and lived through so much, from being born here in a half dugout before statehood, to going to California with a toddler during the Dust Bowl, to coming back. And, you know, the way she took care of people, she cooked. She cooked at the First Baptist Church, she cooked at the Girl Scout camp, and, you know, her example was always, they didn't have much, but there was never not an extra place to be sat at the table if somebody really needed something, or that's just what was instilled in me, and I feel very fortunate about that. And
did you ever work in the store, in the grocery store?
oh yeah. Well, I was very small, so yes, but I still know how to bag groceries, very well.
Just in case
to
this
this
Congress
day.
thing doesn't work out.
Absolutely. I remember, getting a little older and watching people, if I was somewhere else, bag groceries and putting the heavy things on top, and I think my dad would not have liked that very well. But yeah, I helped out when I was little, but then, I said my mom had a physical therapy clinic. So, I saw how small businesses are really important to our communities.
Mm-hmm.
They created jobs, but it's not just you're just an employee. It was really a family relationship. These were people that were close to me.
What industry was in Chickasha? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's
I
okay.
apologize. What industry was in Chickasha? Like, what was the big? Was it just is it a farming town, or back then?
There's a few there's a few different things, but we had the Delta Faucet factory that was out there, but I think a combination, just a smaller town. I think it's about 15,000 people. But the interesting thing about I grew up just outside of town, so I had that combination of a little more rural, and went to small school, Pioneer, until I went to high school into Chickasha, and yes, fighting chicks, of course. But a lot of people don't believe you. You go other places, and they say, "Well, what was your high school mascot?" Oh, it was a fighting chick.
And it still is, I guess.
It is.
Years ago, it was the Henrietta Hens, I think,
Hens,
and they decided to go a different direction than that.
Not Chickasha.
But fighting chicks, man, they're sticking with
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
I got to ask you about the Girl Scouts, because one of the features of your town halls when you were doing live town halls, which were frequent, was the Girl Scouts doing the presentation of the colors, and that was a feature of, I think, almost every single one, and then leading the Pledge of Allegiance. So they're obviously a big part of your background.
Yeah, I mean, I often say I'm a 5th generation Oklahoman and a 4th generation Girl Scout, because it played a role, and it still plays a role in my life. I went on my very first trip as a Girl Scout when I was 6 weeks old. And yes, you heard that right, because my great-grandma, my mama, and my mom had a Girl Scout troop of junior high students, and they were going to go camping. And so we went to National Center West and Wyoming, and that's how my connection to Girl Scouts started.
Youngest,
no, but there
Girl
should
Scout
be.
trip.
Yeah. Well, and when we were there, my great grandma and I, Mama was the oldest person ever to go to National Center West, and I was the youngest. So we set that record going through there. But I feel really fortunate because she was involved, and so was my mom, and Girl Scouts really set a good foundation for me. Not just because it was a thing that my family did, but I got wonderful opportunities to learn about a lot of things. I mean, I think back on some of the foundational things, from bicycle safety to how to interact in a business setting, to doing all kinds of badges and discovery and science and different things. But I also got to see the world, and they have opportunities to apply for trips and learn about different things. They're called wider opportunities. And so I got to go to different places and meet people and really build those skills and leadership and relationships that taught me a lot and still stick with me. That's one of the reasons I'm still so involved with the Girl Scouts. I'm one of 3 members of Congress who's earned their Girl Scout Gold Award, which is, for those who don't know, the equivalent of the Eagle Scout.
Which is a big deal.
Which is a big deal. And that is a project. And I served, before I was elected, I served on the Girl Scout Gold Award Committee here in the Girl Scout Council that's right here in Oklahoma City. Because the young women that are going through that, there's the silver, bronze, silver, and then the gold, they have to come up with a project all on their own that is a service-oriented, something that they care about, that will be sustainable and impact their communities. And there's a lot of different things they have to do, and it's a lot of service hours. And I think that's a really important way, at least for me, and I think for many others, to learn how to stretch yourself into a place that's uncomfortable,
Right.
and to try new things and to identify problems and think about how you solve them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a wonderful tool. And also, selling Girl Scout cookies when I was a kid, great preparation for knocking on doors later on.
No kidding. I didn't think of that.
Because now they have the cookies, they're already there.
Yeah.
Well, when I started selling cookies, you had to go and get the orders filled out and then go back.
Sure.
So we knocked on a lot of doors and sold a lot of Girl Scout cookies. So that was a very formative experience, and I like to be able to talk to the girls and young women that are involved right now and say, hey, listen, this is a great foundation, and give back.
Let me ask you this, University of Tulsa, how did you happen to go there for your undergraduate? What was it that appealed to that? And then on to SMU for law school. Tell me what some of the decisions were there.
I went to, the University of Tulsa, I think, is a great school. I've always had an interest in policy from the time I was young. I remember being fascinated with the news and politics and understanding how things worked. And University of Tulsa is just a really good school, had a great political science and English department. I liked the idea of having a place that was quality education, not too big classes. I just really felt like it was a good fit, and I think I had some incredible instruction and the ability to learn there. And I think I always, thought from when I was young I was probably going to go to law school, because when you have that interest, then in those type of things, it's almost that's where you go. But when I was at University of Tulsa, that's when I connected with and discovered the Oklahoma Intercollegiate Legislature, which I think is, there are not that many states that have the equivalent, but I think it's really a fantastic thing that Oklahoma has, because Governor Nye was one of the founders. It's been around. We just had the 50th anniversary celebration, and it's just such a great way to teach young people not only about the systems, because it's, any college and university throughout the state of Oklahoma can come once a semester, and it's a whole mock state government. And we introduce bills. In fact, there's a lot of bills that have actually made their way into law because they came about, learned about, procedure, rules of procedure, and it's the whole government. I mean, all the way from governor, Supreme Court, all the way to the House and the Senate. But it also, one of the things that I come back to on a regular basis is it taught us how to relate to each other and build those relationships across the aisle. And in fact, some of my closest friends still to this day, I've made through the OIL experience. And some of them, many of them are Republicans, but we learned how to really.
Any in office? Are there any in,
some of them who have been. I think there probably still are some who are. There are many who have been. There are some who are still involved. Many who worked for people in office.
Right.
But there's, I'm sure there are still some that are in office right now. But that's the thing we learned. We would, go back and forth on issues, and we would, have really intense debates, but then be able to build those personal relationships and lifelong friendships that actually help you get to a solution. And I think that's valuable. We need more of that.
A dying art,
Yeah.
for sure. You talk about, this kind of political awareness you had. I mean, that would have been, I would assume, maybe this, given your age, like late second term Reagan and into Bush one, or
it was
like
late '90s. So I graduated high school in '94.
Okay.
So it was
Clinton even,
it was actually during Clinton, and so it was an interesting time here in Oklahoma, right? We had seen, Oklahoma had a majority Democratic legislature for the
Since
majority, of its history since statehood. That was still there, but we were seeing shifting patterns
in the
delegation.
That happened.
That was 1994. 94 was like the first year when a lot of that shifted. So it made for some, really interesting dynamics that you watch now, and I think it's fascinating to see how that unfolds.
I think there are people, younger people, who think Oklahoma's been a red state for, and presidentially it has been.
It has.
But not in the way that it is now. I mean, there were 2 Republican governors, I think,
Yeah.
before the 80s when and
Yeah.
one of them was reelected
Yeah.
years later. But I was going to ask you about Grady County because
Yeah.
where Chickasha is, and
Yeah.
I looked up some numbers. As far back as it goes on the state election board, 1996, it was 70% Democrat registration in 1996. It's 28% Democrat now. Really reflective of the shift. I mean, most counties really were majority Democrat in registration, and I think that started with Clinton. Accelerated some. I think under President Obama, and it's what I've seen, what I've heard, is that that's largely shaped by national political figures. More than what the internal state politics. That it's really kind of reaction to who they see on TV every night as president or whatever, and that kind of brings to mind House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who's been a big part of this the opposition campaign to you. I mean, she's in almost every opposition ad, and I was wondering, rather than getting in kind of the back and forth about how often you vote with her, a lot of people don't realize that she doesn't vote that often. She actually has voted, I think, less than 70 times or something. But the figure is correct. I mean, it's 86%, I think. But if you're reelected, and there's almost no chance that, from what I understand, that the Republicans would regain the House. I mean, it seems like Democrats may actually increase their majority. Would you vote for her again?
Well, I don't know. I have to know who's running and what's happening, and that's the commitment I always make with anything that's going to come up. I got to know what I'm dealing with before I make that commitment. But I certainly think that I have shown that I'm not afraid to stand up for Oklahoma, and I will continue to do that. And to me, part of this back and forth and attacking on somebody else's actions really distracts from the real issues and having a conversation that is based on records and what we've done. I mean, I think I've demonstrated that, and will continue to do that, because one of the problems you've discussed what's happened in this state, and I think what's happening more broadly feels like there's a chasm that's growing, but I don't think that there is amongst most people. It just feels that way. This us versus them. Like, I can't talk to you because you're an X or a Y. I think that's one of the things that's the most harmful. That if we want to get things done, in most times we've got to reach across the aisle to do it, and I think that's healthy. I mean, I think having that tension helps us question our preconceptions, and I think that having unexpected messengers also helps, because a lot of people presume that this is what a Democrat believes, or this is, and quite frankly, I have major disagreements with the speaker and others on some pretty big issues. Now, I think that's why it's important for us to have representatives that are going to question things, not be a rubber stamp for, I don't care which party it is. Like, I just don't think that's the way that representation should work, because I don't represent the Democrats in the 5th District or the people that voted for me. I represent everyone, and needing to take all of those things into account. But certainly these are tactics that have been around for a long time.
And there is a certain amount of blame to be put on the media for this. I mean, having been there for many years, I understand there's a lot more relationships up there than ever get reported. I mean, it's the rare one, like the late Senator Coburn and President Obama. Senator Inhofe and former California Senator Barbara Boxer. There are some that kind of get some attention for whatever reason, but really there are a lot. There are a lot of friendships among people of different parties. I mean, people who might even visit each other in their own districts. I think Markwayne Mullin, Congressman Mullin, and Representative Kennedy from Massachusetts have become friends. So it's common, actually. Exactly. It's not like you guys are in one corner. You say across the aisle all the time, as if there's this real literal split among you, but truly, and on some committees, like Armed Services is a very bipartisan committee for the most part. There is not a lot of public fighting. I know you guys have some, private meetings sometimes, who knows what goes on, but on national security issues, there really is a lot of bipartisan work.
Yeah, there really is, and that's one of the things that I love about the committees that I get to serve on, is that they are the committees that, well, at least some of the committees, science, space, and technology, they're both that way. And in Armed Services, we don't agree on everything. There are places that we can have that healthy debate. But we voted the authorization bill out of committee 56-0 this year,
which is common.
Yeah, and it should be that way.
You have a ton of amendment votes that go on for days, right? I mean, you guys kind of cover the clock sometimes, I think, don't you? But at the end. Yeah.
But at the end, we come together and we get a bill that we can all agree on. Is it perfect? No, but I think you're right. I mean, there are many contributing factors, and I think the way that our political life is covered right now, and with social media and everything that goes into it, the more sensational, the more eyeballs, the more coverage, the more clicks, and that's what leads to things like that. Like, for example, in the class that was elected in 2018, if you look at a lot of the coverage, you'd think there were about 3 new members of the Democratic majority, and they're all so far left, but really, the majority of us that came in are more moderate. We're a little closer to the center. We're not extreme, but I also think we don't throw those like big verbal firebombs and say things that are as sensational, because we want to get things done.
Right.
And on science, space, and technology, I get to serve with Frank Lucas. He's the ranking member. We work together. There's a lot of bipartisan stuff that comes out of there too.
And he definitely is one that people of both parties just love Lucas, and Tom Cole.
Absolutely.
Tom Cole wins praise from Democrats all the time on appropriations for and rules for how willing he is to work with them. And you are part of a caucus called the Problem Solvers that last month came up with what looked like to be kind of a splitting the baby type of plan for more coronavirus relief. Had all the basic elements in there, none of the kind of things that you said were not timely targeted and transparent. And it seemed like the speaker went out of her way to diss it. I mean, I was a little surprised by She said that we're not going to really look at that, I think, at a news conference. But then she had that letter released by the committee chair, and you're just like, that's like extraordinary. I mean, why react like that to it? I mean, what's your response to that? I mean, it seemed like it was a plan that might get some traction.
My response to that was, I have to say, I was shocked and disappointed at that reaction. But I think a couple of things. The Problem Solvers Caucus is the example of what we should be doing, and how
25 Democrats, 25
exactly.
Republicans.
And it's members, right? It's not just. I mean, we've got staff that are fantastic. We couldn't do it without our teams. But I mean, how we got there was we had regular, ongoing conversations, member-to-member conversations. Of course, in this environment, most of them were via Zoom instead of getting in the same room while we were away over. August, and we were still working. But I wonder if sometimes that narrative of this tension of back and forth of us versus them doesn't feed into that. And I was disappointed to see that reaction. I think you probably saw my reaction. That quite frankly. Disappointed, maybe a little bit gentle. I was very unhappy.
It was
to see that reaction.
It was just seemed. I don't know what the word would be, but it was surprising. It was surprising for her to take that step, to have that kind of slap down of it at that point. But one thing I wanted to ask you about these packages. And of course, that package had unemployment, small business, more direct payments. More money for testing. The one element of some of these packages that I'm kind of wondering about is the state and local aid. I think there was $500 billion more in that, which seems like quite a lot. And in Oklahoma, you had localities that seemed they didn't know what to do with the money they already had. Oklahoma County decided to build a new jail with it, or committed to building a new jail. State of Oklahoma announced this week that they're going to use some for a new public health lab, which I don't think that was ever really, these kinds of capital projects was ever really the idea of, this is you guys passed that CARES Act package when it was really just, nobody has an infrastructure to deal with this. Nobody has the PPE to deal with this, personal protective equipment. We just need to get the money, and we don't want them to worry about money. Let's give them the money. So why more local and state aid?
Well, there were a couple of things that happened in the CARES Act, some restrictions around the funding that I think have led to less than desirable expenditures.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. So, framing that up, and I think that's been one of the places of contention, because in the CARES Act, the only places that got direct funding were cities or counties of 500,000 people or more. So there was no direct aid that were going to the smaller towns.
But the state could give
and
them
the small,
some, couldn't
they
they?
could. They could.
It had Stitt mentioned.
Yeah, it had to go through the state.
Okay.
But there was also a restriction on the local governments from using it to make up for shortfalls in revenue.
Right.
And part of that's coming from, I think you've seen it in talking points from McConnell and some of the right, that they didn't want to bail out different
blue states.
Yeah, exactly. But the reality is there were a lot of state and local governments that saw a very real drop in revenue, and that they needed to make up for, that goes to police, fire, sanitation, first responders, a lot of those core components of their budget that was a drop as a result of COVID-19. And I think that was one of the shortcomings of the funding that was included in the CARES Act, because I think it could have been more wisely directed. And that's one of the things that we addressed in the Problem Solvers package, that we didn't just add on top of it. Our roadmap would have let state and local governments use those funds to make up for budget shortfalls as a result of COVID-19.
Okay.
So they would have to prove it, right? So that's a way that split the difference, right? We're not bailing people out who are irresponsible before. The same thing with, we're talking about small businesses and PPP. That program has been incredibly helpful, and it wasn't intended to bail people out who were already in trouble.
Right.
It was intended to help
keep
businesses.
people on your payroll.
Exactly.
They didn't go on unemployment right away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there is still a great need, because there are a lot of, I've talked to state and local leaders, especially municipalities, who wanted and needed to apply for CARES Act funding, but were told they couldn't use it for the things that they really needed to use it for, those kind of expenses.
Right, I heard the lack of flexibility was kind of a thing.
And so I think that's what was in there, and I don't know, I don't know why the reaction was as it was. If the idea that it wasn't enough, or I think there were maybe some reports that there wasn't state and local funding in there. I'm not sure, but to me the bottom line is, we can sit here and point fingers as much as we want to, but people are hurting. We've got businesses here that are on their last leg, and this isn't about just federal government coming in. This is our role. It's in times of emergency that we really need to step up.
And that's what I want to talk to you about, because this has been a 6-month emergency, a pandemic. How do you think the Trump administration has handled the coronavirus? And what about him personally? Do you think he was careless? Do you think he and some of the inner circle there at the White House got COVID-19 because they were careless?
Well, I think a pandemic is something not of this scale. None of us have ever lived through this. So the significance of the health and economic consequences and what it's meant for our day-to-day lives has just been almost all-consuming. But in that, the best way to address the economic impact is to listen to our public health officials. And the advice of public health officials has been, once we figured out, and I think that's a piece of it, we didn't know at first, right? It's a novel virus. Once we figured out that transmission could be reduced with masks and social distance and hand washing and certain steps, following those, steps and advice is one of the most effective ways to reduce the transmission. We're not really going to get everything restarted until we get the numbers down. And I think it's really unfortunate and unnecessary that things like those public health recommendations were turned into political footballs. That the things that should never have been politicized were politicized, and I think it has gotten in the way of a speedier recovery, and unfortunately, I think has resulted in increased rates of transmission, and we have 210,000 plus deaths right now.
Right.
So to me, what we need in a time like this is we need thoughtful, planned leadership that follows the advice of science. It doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything. I mean, I'll take the Problem Solvers Caucus. We'll go back to the very beginning. We also put out a roadmap that said these are the things that we really need to do. Follow the advice of public health experts. We need to do these things with health. We need to do these things with the economy. And there were a lot of places of overlap. Now, I'll tell you, there are places that we disagreed. We didn't just say, oh, this is great, this is perfect, we all agree on this. It took us weeks of real conversations with each other to get there. And I think it's worthwhile. But I think making sure that we're setting a good example about listening to public health officials and putting good information out there is helpful for our ability to relate to each other, our ability to reduce the transmission of the virus, and to restart the economy. And I think framing things as either economy or health, and we've seen it on both sides, right? Some people it's all about the health, not about the economy. That doesn't work either. The best way to restart is to do both things. And I think an example, I think we need to be setting that kind of example.
One thing that was really a focus early on was the PPE, and these warehouses full of expired PPE that were half full, and just not being able to mobilize this critical equipment to healthcare providers quickly, which put some of them at risk. What should Congress be doing now? I mean, you don't want to look back and say, and in the meantime, while we were dealing with, we failed to prepare for the next one, because there will be another one. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So what should Congress's focus be? Maybe beginning of the next Congress, beginning in January.
Well, I think we still have to be dealing with this, but I think you're right. We absolutely need to plan looking forward. And if you talk to,
what happened here? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
But what happened here? What happened in every state was that you had these governors scrambling, hiring these kind of shifty contractors who had no experience, selling PPE. And it was just like every governor for himself.
Yes, that's a problem, right? That approach is a problem, because in a time of a national pandemic, it's not like, say we had a tornado here, right? Then you would send, FEMA would come in and it would be a state-directed response, right? This is a national pandemic. And that's, if you talk to anyone who has a career in emergency response, you have to have a clear chain of communications and layered response that ensures that the supplies get where they're most needed, most efficiently and effectively. And that's really what was needed during the response to this pandemic, so you didn't have that competition. So that's one piece of this, and what we need is a national strategy. Expired PPE and things like that in our national stockpiles is a sort of a failure of ongoing management of those stockpiles. And we need to make sure that we have a plan in place that keeps them stocked. And then there's a way to rotate them out, right? Once they hit a certain point, they can be distributed, purchased by, hospitals here in Oklahoma or wherever else, to make sure that you're not letting things get expired, and making sure that you're keeping those going. But we also have to have a plan. You're right. I mean, all of the public health experts say it's not an if, but a when.
Right.
And then as Congress, we also need to do a few things. It's highlighted the lack of critical critical drugs, on other things.
The testing
And
materials
the
themselves.
Testing, exactly.
Yeah.
So we need to, and I'm co-sponsored a couple of bills that would address this, address strategic national stockpile and supplies, encourage manufacturing of these things domestically. It doesn't mean we have to bring everything here, but without domestic capability, we saw all the things that you mentioned. Companies that had no experience. We've seen counterfeit things coming in from China and other countries that we have to maintain vigilance about what's coming in and the quality. But we need to incentivize and rebuild a domestic manufacturing base and make sure that we have a stockpile that is stocked and is properly rotated, so that if something like this comes along again, we're ready to respond. But it does require a great deal of planning and preparation. And I do think a nationally coordinated response would have had much different outcomes than competition between the states.
Let me shift to healthcare real quick. It's an issue in this race, obviously, probably around the country. There's yet another Affordable Care Act case before the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't know what the chances are, but it came from Circuit Court in Texas that basically said because the individual mandate is no longer enforced, the whole, all these other parts crumble. And last night in your first debate, you made the point that Senator Bice, that Republicans don't have a plan for replacing it. No. But what could occur if current projections are right, is that Democrats are in charge, maybe of the White House, maybe both houses of Congress, but certainly of one. So it's really not going to be up to them to replace it. It'll be up to you, your party, to replace it. What would you replace it with?
Well, let's take a step back about why it's such a bad idea to try to pull the rug out from under these critical protections during the midst of a pandemic. I mean, that's where I think we
can
need
do
to
that
start.
as long as you answer my question.
Yeah, I will. But think about that. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of people here in the state that are impacted by pre-existing conditions. I mean, estimates are, and I think, who knows if these are high or low. I mean, I think they're probably, we've got more as people continue to get older, 700,000 plus Oklahomans with pre-existing conditions. And, without those protections, there are a lot of outcomes that could negatively impact people and will, because before the ACA was in place, people could be denied coverage. The costs were so exorbitant for people with any pre-existing conditions that many of them went without health insurance. Right. And Oklahoma still has the second highest rate of uninsured in the country, hopefully to go down next year with the implementation of the Medicaid expansion.
Which would be lost if
which would be lost
if ACA is struck down.
So that's more than 1 million Oklahomans that we're talking about. But
we should say too about to cover people with pre-existing conditions is to tell insurance companies they have to cover them, is to say that you have to cover the highest risk, most expensive patients that are in this state, and create that pool of those people. And that the whole idea, the struggles of policymakers for decades has been, how do you get healthy people into that pool to bring those costs down? So how, if the ACA is basically dismantled, how do you get healthy people into the pool with the more expensive people?
Well, I think we have to go back to something that looks like the bones of the ACA, because I certainly don't think throwing the whole system out and doing something completely different is smart or advisable, and I don't think it's realistic.
Could it lead? I mean, I know you're against Medicare for all. You said that for a long time.
Yep.
But could it lead to that? I mean, if Democrats can't go through that whole, exercise that the Clintons did and then President Obama did of trying to craft this, kind of multi-piece thing where it all fits together and hopefully works, could you just say, okay, we'll just go to Medicare for all? Then?
I don't think so, and I don't think so certainly in the short term, because what is clear from the ACA and from the implementation over the past decade is that the protections that were put in the ACA, it wasn't perfect. I mean, we can all acknowledge that.
Premiums have gone
the
up and deductibles have gone up. It's expensive
Yes,
still.
it is expensive
But
still.
healthcare is expensive.
Healthcare is expensive, and
Yeah.
it's gone down. And some of the supports that were put into place originally in the ACA to address the cost and keep them down have been stripped out over the course of the past decade.
Right.
And so it is partially because healthcare is expensive, but partially because the things that were put into the ACA to ensure affordability have been removed. And the only way really to make sure you get younger, healthier people in these pools is by making sure that you're doing your best to require.
That's where the individual mandate came
That's
from.
where the
Yeah.
individual
And the
mandate-
subsidies.
Exactly. Because if you can't afford it and you're denied insurance, you're only going to have people that are the sickest, and then they're not going to be able to afford the coverage, which takes us back to a place I don't think we want to be. Because when we're talking about healthcare, I mean it's an issue for all of us because it's about quality of life, but it's also a real economic issue.
Of course.
You know, we had a town hall with some earlier today with Dean Gary Mascot from OU College of Public Health and Lou Carmichael and a number of other healthcare leaders talking about the challenges that they're facing, and you know what evidence shows is that from the ACA's implementation, we've seen uninsured rates go down significantly, as well as cost. I mean, it is still expensive. We do have to address that. We have to address
the deductibles, because some
yeah.
people, you know, they're out
Exactly.
thousands of dollars a
Yes.
year that they may not have. Just
Exactly. Yeah, I mean it's hard. I mean this is not an easy thing to solve, which is why I also am not a fan of Medicare for all, because we still have issues with Medicare that we need to fix. You know, we're fighting to make sure that we're taking care of the Medicare trust right now.
Right.
One of the
it's just
things that I've
years
been
away
leaning on.
from not being able to meet its
Exactly.
obligations.
2023 and Social Security in 2031. That's why I'm, you know, a co-sponsor of the Trust Act. Some people say that this is a way of undoing them, and I say actually no, it's not. It's just the opposite. If we don't act, we're going to lose these critical protections. So to me, making sure that we're expanding something that we already need to fix doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And that's why, and there are a lot of people and companies that have really good health insurance plans. So why would we want to do away with that if it's working for some people? We've got to focus on the protections and, you know, putting some parameters and holding drug companies and insurance companies accountable. The only reason that insurance companies switched over to covering people with pre-existing conditions was because of the ACA. So they
were required to.
Yeah, they were required.
But they were
to.
given, you know, they were given the promise that you will have other patients,
Yes.
you will have other customers
Yes.
to bring the cost down.
Yes. And so as an investment, if we have healthier people, the more we make sure that people have insurance and access to ongoing preventative care, we get a healthier population. And that actually saves money in the long run. So it's like, to me, it's like public education. That's an upfront investment in our future. Public health and investing in making sure that we've got healthier populations actually has a dramatic economic benefit because then people aren't missing work as much. You have a lower instance of significant health concerns that prevent people from working if they aren't able to get care until they are so bad they literally can't work anymore. So to me, I think about it from a human perspective, but also you know, from a long-term economic perspective. If we want to reduce these long-term costs of really expensive treatments, then we know certain things are preventable. So we should prevent as much as possible.
Yeah. And that was part of the ACA. It made a lot of prevention free under. Let me, speaking of long-term thinking, I wanted to get to climate change before we run out of time. And I know that you're not a sponsor of the Green New Deal, not a supporter of the Green New Deal. So I really just want to get from you some 2 or 3 ideas from you about, and along with that, let's talk about the fossil fuel industry and the votes that that are being part of these ads run against you. There were 4 amendment votes.
Yes.
3 of them had to do with drilling in one off the coast, one off the Gulf, one off the coast of, the Atlantic coast, and then in Anwar, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Those amendments would have barred drilling in those, or even off the Atlantic coast, even the exploration, like even to begin looking at drilling off the Atlantic coast. The fourth had to do with methane leakage from drilling operations. So, so obviously, you have some feeling about where the fossil fuel industry fits into climate change and what should happen with.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think those votes have been absolutely wholly mischaracterized, and the claims about the impact on Oklahoma's oil and gas industry are absolutely false and have been debunked. I'll lay it out. The votes about limiting offshore drilling, not one single Oklahoma headquartered company drills offshore.
Right, Devon gave it up years ago.
Exactly. There's not one. They are international conglomerate companies. They don't drill here.
Right.
So that's not hurting any Oklahoma companies, right? The Anwar, to my knowledge, and we reached out, I've talked to Oklahoma companies, no Oklahoma company has plans to drill in Anwar. I'll take the methane vote separately in just a moment.
Okay.
But let's be clear, like, we need, climate change is real, we have to follow the science, but we need an all of the above approach. I think I absolutely do not support the Green New Deal. It is not well thought out. It would have opposite impacts. We do need to address climate change, but we need an all of the above approach. It has to have oil and gas as a piece of it. Right now, 80% of our energy infrastructure is based on hydrocarbons. But we also know, this is one of the reasons I oppose a federal ban on fracking. When some people in my party proposed it, I absolutely stood up and said no, because the ability to use natural gas as a component, as a bridge, and as a component of our energy infrastructure has done a few things that are very important. One, it's reduced the cost to households of energy. That's critical, especially when we're talking about families that are just struggling to make ends meet. Two, it's a national security issue, because by the investments that we've made domestically, instead of having to import oil and gas, we have it domestically. So that's a national security issue. And it also actually empowers us to be able to compete with some of our adversaries like Russia. And
it's changed those relationships completely. Yeah.
Right? So we no longer have to rely on them. And in fact, we could, sell to our allies. And so those are important pieces of the puzzle. But let me talk about the impact on environment. Right here, just taking OG&E. In their transition from coal-fired power plants to natural gas-fired power plants, they've reduced their harmful greenhouse gas emissions by 40%. And that's something that I bring.
With wind and gas?
Wind, yeah. But the primary driver of that is coal to natural gas.
Right.
And they've incorporated wind and solar. Because Oklahoma is an energy state. It's it's oil and gas, but it's also wind and solar. We're leading the way in a lot of different arenas, and we need an all of the above approach in order to get there. The vote on the methane pipeline, I think it's actually good for both environment and ultimately oil and gas companies. I know it's reducing leaks, but if we lose less methane, first of all, there's less going into the atmosphere. So we're addressing that, but it also ensures that more of the products can be delivered. And I think it's a part of a smart approach. It's not saying you can't have pipelines. It's not saying, we're going to quit this. It's let's be smart and make sure that we're building things in a safe way and monitoring and reducing leaks. I mean, to me, that's common sense, right? That is just common sense.
It was the enforcement of an EPA rule about.
And we need that.
Okay.
And so to just like go back to what it means environmentally. Look, I mentioned earlier my mama, and I talk about her a lot. Oklahomans, those of us that have been here for a long time, understand the importance of taking care of our environment, of taking care of our land, our conserving water, and all of these things. Because otherwise you end up like my great-grandmother in a truck going to California
Right.
with the toddler on your lap because we have the Dust Bowl.
Right.
So to me, this is another example of this either or approach being really detrimental. The Green New Deal, first of all, it's not even a bill. It doesn't have, like, it just does not actually have any reasonable solutions, and thus I just don't even take it seriously, to be honest, because it's so blatantly ridiculous. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't take action to address issues of climate change, right? But we have to do it in a smart and sustainable way, encouraging development of alternative and renewable energy sources, while understanding that a transition that businesses and industries can count on has to be a part of that. And how do we use them to have a longer term sustainable investment in energy? You know, one of the things we're seeing in California right now is their inability to keep the lights on.
Right.
Because
they have these mandates, right?
Yeah, they've got these mandates that don't match up with the reality of where our
And they have a new one, I think,
is.
for when you can no longer buy a car with a combustible engine.
And the problem there is that doesn't take into account the impacts on the marginalized communities that some people say they're concerned about. Because when we're talking about communities and households that are just struggling to get by, they can't afford to replace all of their appliances if someplace like Oakland suddenly decides you can't have natural gas. They can't afford to, families can't necessarily afford to go out and buy a new car and shift everything over. The infrastructure's not there. What we need is long-term investments that build things up and allow for a transition. But what's harmful is not doing anything, because it pushes us further back. I mean, sitting on armed services, I know that one of the biggest concerns and national security threats is sea level rise and is climate change. So we have to address it.
They've been dealing with it for years out there.
Especially Norfolk is,
Well, they've been trying to even war plan, I think,
Exactly.
based on, what may happen.
Oh, they have,
change.
absolutely. And so I think to me, we should be concerned about our environment, and climate change is real, and we have to follow the science, but we need to do so in a smart and sustainable way, because we could either take reasonable steps now, or we're going to fall further behind. But if we try to shift everything all at once, it's going to have a lot of other harmful effects. So, I work and we reach out. I talk to oil and gas industry, and I work with them on an ongoing basis, because I understand the importance of oil and gas as an overall part of our energy. And so that's why these attacks they're just a part of that same old, like, this is us versus them, and they're just flatly not true.
I just got the signal. I've taken up way too much of your time already, but I don't want to leave without getting to what's happened this year with the issues of local policing. What we've seen, some of the horrific scenes that we've seen with police action and what followed in some cases. So I want to talk about local policing and what the federal role here is. I mean, I know that you are not an advocate of defunding the police, and I think the House passed a bill that would ban chokeholds, and it created some kind of database for police misbehavior, but I'm not really sure how that would work. So why don't you tell me what can be done on the federal level? I think there are a number of things that we can do on the federal level, and you're right. I don't support defunding the police. We need our police. They're public safety officers. They're really critical. And what we saw this summer really calls upon us to look at what's working and what's not, so we can hold bad actors accountable. It's really not something that should ever be the case. If somebody's afraid to interact with the police because of the color of their skin. That bill also removed qualified immunity, didn't it? I mean, is that a way to deal with it? It didn't totally remove qualified immunity. So I'll talk for just a second about what it did, and what we need to address. You're right. It banned chokeholds, banned racial profiling. It includes a nationwide police misconduct database. And now that doesn't mean for officers that it's just anybody that makes an accusation that would fall into that database. It has to be proven. But one of the challenges right now is that those bad actors
can go to another department
Right.
without any disclosure. Now, looking at the issues, one of the stickiest things, one of the most challenging issues is qualified immunity, because we do need, when people are working on behalf of a government, that they need to be able to know that they are, that they, in doing their duties as they have been laid out, have some protections. But the problem with qualified immunity is the way that it's been interpreted, and it's gone through the court system, and it's basically been interpreted to such the point, if there has not been the exact same scenario that has happened before with the exact same things, that it's very, very narrow. Now, I know this is a challenging area for us to talk about, but I also think that there's room for bipartisan solutions, and we absolutely need to take action.
Right.
The reason I say this, I'm going to go back to the problem solvers for just a moment, because in the wake of all of this summer, we've been sitting down and talking about this. Even after I did support George Floyd Justice and Policing, because I think it's a step in the right direction and it's actionable solutions. At the federal level, we're not going to control individual budgets in cities or
Right.
states, but what we can do is influence federal dollars and ensure
Which
best
they count
practices.
on, which
Yeah.
local law enforcement, they have to pay attention to that.
Exactly. And we can do it in a number of ways. Like, if you meet these certain best practices standards, then you qualify for federal funds. If you don't, then you don't. So it's an incentive-based
Right.
kind of model. But even before that, I had introduced a bill to provide funding for police departments to learn how to respond to mental health crisis situations.
Yeah.
Bipartisan.
Right.
And honestly, that bill, I'm really proud of the fact that it's got a companion bill in the Senate and the House, and has been endorsed by everyone locally, from the local NAACP and Black Lives Matter to the National Fraternal Order of Police, Tactical Officers Association, Alliance, the National Alliance
it
on
passed
Mental Illness.
easily, but bogged down in the Senate like everything.
Yeah. And anyway, but we also sat down, problem solvers. We have a task force of us talking through these things and figuring out a way to get to some more actionable, and we haven't stopped, right? It passed through the House, but again, things are stuck in the Senate, but we haven't stopped working on it. And what I know from those conversations is there are productive pathways forward. We're still not going to agree on everything, but actionable and productive pathways forward that aren't just about talking about it, that would really make a difference. And they're hard. Like, these are hard conversations to have. They're important conversations to have, and it's important that we take action. But I think that these hard conversations can't be boiled down to either you support the system as it is or you want to eliminate it, because that's not really the choice that we have in front of us. There are a lot of other issues that have led to the systemic injustice, and we have to address them, including the weight that we're putting on our police officers to respond to all of these things.
Right.
So I think the pathway forward is through more of these conversations. We're going to have to continue to take steps, and I think the Justice and Policing Act was an important one. Is there room for maybe some more conversation, and maybe it looks a little bit different on the other side of it? Yeah, absolutely. But I think there's a pathway to something better here.
Yeah, if people want to get there.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you go, but I do want to ask you one other question. I think I know the answer to it, and that is, would you commit to the same kind of town hall schedule in a second term that you've had?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you seem to.
That's easy.
Actually, yeah, I figured you would say that. You were sometimes 2 or 3 a month, but pre-pandemic, standing up, and it's important for people to be able to come ask you pretty much anything. I think we heard at some of them.
Exactly. Well, I mean, that's how I found out about the problems with military housing.
Right.
That's how we
first
got
one,
the
I think, right?
exactly. Very first one, Tenants' Bill of Rights. We got that. That's how we do it. You know, it's not quite that. We've been doing virtual town halls. They don't have quite the same ability to just interact.
Right.
I mean, we still are taking a bunch of questions, but it's not quite the same. So absolutely, and because I think that's my job, right? It's to be thoughtful about policy, but it's also to listen to and understand how Oklahomans are experiencing the things that we're doing, where they need help. And you know, I'm really proud of the work that we've done in this first term to help Oklahomans. We've helped more than 20, I think we're at 2,300 people now. recovering $3.5 million in taxpayer funds. We've helped more than 115 small businesses with PPP and other loan programs just during the pandemic. More than 800 people with their unemployment benefits during the pandemic. Hundreds of veterans. I mean, I could go on. And that's, I find out about that.
It's kind of the
through
hidden
those,
work of congressional offices.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and we
it
find
really
out
is.
about some
Yeah.
of that through these town halls as well. Yeah.
Congresswoman, thanks again so much for coming in.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for watching. Again, on Tuesday, October 13th at 2 p.m., we will have Republican State Senator Stephanie Bice, who is the opponent of Congresswoman Horn in the 5th Congressional District. I hope you'll join us, or look for it on Oklahoman.com later or on our YouTube channel. Thanks again.